Good morning, everyone. I am Jason Bowman, and this analysis was conducted for Intro to Sociology during the spring semester of 2018. The article I was given to analyze was Attitudes Toward Wife Abuse of Police Officers and Judiciary Members in Turkey, Profession, Gender, Ambivalent Sexism, and Sex Roles by Z. Belma Golge, Yasmin Sanal, Sinay Yavuz, S.A. Arsalanoglu Keaton. This can be found in Volume 31 of the Journal of Family Abuse from August 2016. The main research question was to see if there was any correlation between the professions, ambivalent sexism, gender, and gender roles when studying the attitudes of police officers and judiciary members towards wife abuse. An independent variable is defined as a factor that causes a change to a dependent variable, while a dependent variable is defined as a factor in an experiment that is changed by an independent variable. These are both according to Henslin. In this study, the independent variable would be sex and occupation, while the dependent variable are tolerance of physical and verbal abuse of married women and the idea of the victim leaving an abusive marriage partner. The hypotheses are that police officers and the men would be more tolerant of physical and verbal abuse of married women by their husbands, that they would agree less that victims of violence should leave their marriage partner. Also that profession, gender, ambivalent sexism, and gender roles are all strong predictors of attitudes toward wife abuse. To test their hypotheses, they used the survey technique, which Henslin describes as collecting data by having people answer several questions. The population was all Turkish police officers and judiciaries, while the sample was 450 officers and judiciaries, which included 150 judiciaries and 300 officers, as well as 365 men and 85 women. They were given a wide assortment of surveys to complete, such as attitudes toward wife abuse scales and others, asking questions like, is the beating of a wife a cause for divorce? After the tests were collected, the data found that police officers and men were more tolerant of physical and verbal abuse, but less supportive of the idea that victims should leave their abusive partners. The tests also found that profession and ambivalent sexism were the strongest predictors of wife abuse. One ethical concern that could have been dealt with better is allowing the respondents to express their own ideas. The surveys were structured in a way that they could only explain how passionate they were towards the subject, but couldn't go into much detail. They could only use answers that the researchers had already made. As explained by Professor Mueller, a sociologist believes that our behavior is affected by external forces. This would lead them to find factors such as the two groups being studied could be heavily influenced by their peers, and whom they work with more interesting. For example, a police officer could be more tolerant as they are more used to seeing this in the workforce compared to a judiciary member who is specifically trained to speak out against this kind of abuse. On the other end, again according to Mueller, a psychologist believes that our behavior is affected by internal forces. They would find that perhaps the officers are more tolerant towards wife abuse, as they are the cause of minor domestic abuse to their spouses and children at home, and more interesting. To better understand this study, I found a second article titled Ambivalent Sexism and Attitudes Toward Wife Abuse in Turkey and Brazil by Peter Glick. This appeared in the 2002 issue of Psychology of Women Quarterly. A major find within this was that in both countries, they considered hostile and benevolent sexism positively correlated with attitudes that legitimized abuse. They considered hostile sexism only accounting for unique variances, and benevolent sexism was unrelated to wife abuse attitudes. To connect this with the first article, this explains that in places like Turkey, they do not see domestic abuse as a problem. This is why officers were more tolerant towards the abuse, as it was a common occurrence in that area.